I'm very encouraged to see all you back. It's Friday, we're sort of in the home stretch. It's great to be here. It's been really helpful in listening to your stories on how you're using the model. I'm relatively new with Energy Exemplar. Been here about just under 3 months. Been in the space a long time. Operated in a lot of different markets. But you know, what I'm learning today is all the unique applications that our users are using the tool to sort of solve some pretty complicated problems. My presentation today is, I feel like I'm singing to the choir, if that analogy works in Australia, is that you're already embracing the robustness of the model. But I just wanted to sort of, for the sake of completeness and wrap up of some of the stories that we've heard, I'd just sort of like to go through some slides. So today I'll talk a little bit about current day. I'm very interested in how markets change over time and transform. All markets are always going through stages of transformation. There's no end point as far as markets restructuring things. It's a journey as opposed to an end point. I'll also talk about the value proposition across that we see in co-optimization, and then bring up some use cases. I saw this illustration. I thought it was very appropriate for the challenge that you have before you, in that the world is changing, markets are changing, technology is changing, and you're sort of at the forefront. You're at a location and where your organization is asking you some really hard problems, and you have a very important role in helping your organization decide what they want to be, what's their future look like, how is that going to impact our investments, how is that going to impact the business model that we want to pursue as these markets transform. This is sort of a journey of my career. I started in 1982, as I was only 10 years old when I started. But back then the world was different. I worked for a vertically integrated utility in New York State, and when they started talking about market restructuring, I and all my 4,000 colleagues had no idea what it meant. We just didn't know. I mean, we operated a very efficient coal-fired, coal and hydro-fired, and a gas utility that served about 800,000 customers across the rural parts of New York, and we just had no clue of what restructuring, that journey of restructuring. Today, that business is owned by Iberdrola. It is now a regional distribution company across the northeast of the United States. The generation assets were sold to AES. The AES then bankrupted those assets due to the low prices of gas and being coal-fired generation. They made a bunch of money, though, along the journey. They bought those assets when coal was on margin, and then they essentially had 15 years of gas being on margin, having low-cost coal plants, and they made a fortune. Things changed around, gas prices went to the roof, and then they handed the keys back to the bank. So the transformation of the energy supply mix over that time period, 1982, coal was still king as far as power generation, and this is around the world. This is an energy mix around the world, so not one particular market. And some interesting trends. Natural gas going from roughly 9 or about 10%. In 1982, our view of natural gas was that we thought it was too beautiful a fuel to put into a boiler. It was almost, a sin to use that beautiful natural gas and sending it into a fired station. So things have changed dramatically, perspectives. Also, nuclear back then. 1982, a lot of nuke was being built, and even still, nuclear went from 13% up to almost 30% worldwide as we look at it. And a big crash in hydro. Hydro was very significant in the 80s around the world, but very difficult to license new hydro. With the exception of big projects in China and elsewhere, a lot of the hydro is hydro that was built 40 years ago and still operating, but you don't see these large projects due to the environmental issues of trying to get these projects licensed. And then the growth of renewables. Now, it didn't really start with very much, but solar, wind, almost about 10% of capacity now worldwide, coming from pretty much nothing in the 80s. And then also our populations are shifting. So 4.6 billion in the 80s, over 7 billion today. And that concentration of that population in cities. And the reason why this is important is because you're going to see, over time, you'll see, and you see this in Europe. I think Europe is sort of a leader in this space. But the integration of energy and transportation is becoming more and more important. The large rail companies are considering how do they play in the energy space? How do they put inductive brakes on their trains and then store that energy to either reduce peaks or sell into the ancillary service markets? So some new players in the transportation space. The other, from 1982, Madonna was the material girl. She sort of brought about some significant changes to the music industry. And over time, she's sort of mellowed out and sort of is now an important figure in music in different ways. As you look around the world, there's some trends. The North American markets are predominantly, you see a lot of renewables being driven by state policy. Not Donald Trump has sort of undermined renewable policy, but a lot of the renewable decisions are being made at the state level because of renewable portfolio standards and such. And so each state is sort of still taking on a journey of moving to renewables. The other element of the North American market that has changed dramatically is shale gas. Shale gas, the expansion of shale gas across the Dakotas, across the Northeast, has really changed the flow of gas. Gas used to flow out of the Texas region up to the Northeast, and now actually gas is flowing back from the Northeast into the Midwest and to Texas. So some dramatic transformations. And what that has done is really driven down the wholesale price of gas. The amount of gas in the U.S. is still sort of captured. There's not enough export capability to get it out of the States. So you're seeing gas prices where they were prior to 2000, at the $2, $2.50 US dollar level, which is good for the consumers, but it's horrible if you're a generation company. So massive consolidation of the generation space, hedge funds coming in, picking up these assets for pennies on the dollars. So a big transformation in ownership that's going on in the States. And then you look at Europe, where a tremendous amount of baseload central stations of nukes and coal are under attack. Germany announcing that they're getting all out of coal and nukes. Belgium making the same announcement. And many other countries have just decided they're shutting down all their coal activities. So 90 gigawatts coming out of that, which is transforming the whole gas markets across Europe. So gas will become a more important fuel. Gas and renewables. Gas seems to be that bridge fuel for Europe to get to a higher renewable penetrations. In the developing worlds, you still see the base nukes, coal, as really being developed across China, across India, where you have this dramatic expansion of electrification. They're bringing on renewables, but that conventional fuels are still being used there. And then you have Japan, the Fukushima accident back in 2012 or so, 2011, 2012, dramatically changed issues. It really was a death knell to nuclear expansion around the globe. And furthermore, it triggered a huge demand for LNG into that market. 54 nuclear power stations shut down after Fukushima. About a third of them are back online, but still creating this huge demand for LNG, which had a huge impact on Australia. The Australia exports have grown dramatically over the last 6 years, predominantly due to Fukushima, which has resulted in higher gas prices, right? That gas being exported, unlike the U.S., where we didn't have the export capabilities, that about 80% of the natural gas, or this gas, is being exported, which is a very different story than you see in the US. What has that resulted? A tighter correlation of power and gas. So talking to you about co-optimization of power and gas is a slam dunk. That discussion is still foreign in the US and Europe, and that's just starting to happen. But you already embrace that model that you can't really look at the power system without understanding the impacts of gas. The other thing that we heard about is about innovation. And there is a tremendous amount of transformation that is happening in the distribution level. The distribution companies are no longer thinking themselves as essentially pipes and wires of a dumb system that they just procure energy and pass it through their substations or their distribution networks. They are thinking more of becoming platform companies. They want to own the platform that allow other people to interact for the distributed energy resources that are going to be becoming more and more prevalent as the cost of renewables, the cost of DERs continues to drive lower and lower. The other aspect is microgrids. We heard from Ross about microgrids in remote locations. Well, I've formerly worked for ABB, and right now ABB and Siemens are putting a tremendous amount of investment into microgrids, and it's not for remote areas. It is for grid-connected applications. It's for the you looked at the hurricane and how it impacted Puerto Rico. Well, Puerto Rico did an integrated resource plan, and microgrids is a significant component of how to rebuild the electric system of Puerto Rico, both for emergency supply, but also for grid stability. How am I doing on time? So with all this, your job is a lot harder. In my view, your job has never been harder than it is today. But that sort of falls into Glenn's vision, right? Glenn has been in this business for 20 years, and he's been solving hard problems. And he's created a platform that gives the user the capability of answering some questions that we haven't even thought of. So that, as I look at, our mission is to really work together as a team to help you transform and reposition your business for this changing world. And with that, there's a lot of components that we need to model effectively. Some of these components, the more we can put these stories together, the more we can integrate the co-optimization, the higher the value proposition that we offer. And these are some of the challenges, and these challenges are different in every market that we face. And the platform has to be robust enough to work in Sydney, to work in Milan, or to work in Seattle, or potentially Tokyo. So these issues allow us to build a lot of core functionality. So Plexus 8 is now coming available. Some of the enhancements that we've made on the user interface, and the ability to do better co-optimization. And the big thing in co-optimization is speed. I heard Nicola was talking the other day about how do we use best practices. Where we have these big challenges. How do we create a forum where you can share best practices and trying to model? So it's not only coming up with the right solution, but it's what trade-offs do we have to make in order to configure the model to solve the problem in the time frame that you have to provide the information to your stakeholders. So my core focus right now is looking at how do we expand into that gas business. How do we be a better vendor in going after the gas optimization space and co-optimizing that power and gas infrastructure decisions. So when you're looking at an integrated resource plan, typically you're looking at what to build, what generation assets to build, what transmission upgrades are necessary, what new transmission lines are needed. You haven't even thought about the gas infrastructure. I think the integrated stories of tomorrow is really looking about, hey, instead of building a new transmission line, can we expand the gas capability? Can we add gas storage to an area to sort of create more electric resilience? And you see this back in my home territory of the United States, these polar vortex issues that are coming through. Again, we just had a recent one that came through Chicago and sort of just hung out there and moving its way into the Northeast. You now have the competition of gas going to heating in competition with electricity production. So you have this conflict of, do I heat a home or do I shut the lights out? And the ISOs in those regions are now taking into consideration the gas infrastructure in order to look at grid stability. The one area that we support is looking at, and you heard some of the stories from Amo yesterday about doing integrated resource planning, taking into consideration the gas network as well as the electric infrastructure, and how are they going to work together. The other part of this is there's a lot of gas companies, or local LDCs, or local distribution companies, that are focused on gas and gas alone. We believe that supporting their supply planning efforts will provide significant value to them. We also heard about the stories from Synergy and looking at co-optimization of their gas contracts, and you saw how complex their PPAs were that they had to model to determine whether to run it through one combustion turbine or another, and getting that complexity built into a short-term optimization tool. I was really impressed with what Synergy accomplished there, because that is true optimization. When you get into that operational space, that is real hard savings. That's earnings for your organization. The better you can do that, you are driving pure profit down to the bottom line. The area that I don't have up here yet, and because we're still exploring and growing it, is the area of investment in liquefied natural gas supply chain optimization. This is an area that I'm very interested in. How do we look at LNG? Because as you track LNG has become, the way LNG used to work was I bought a 30-year contract, I built a ship, and I had a 30-year agreement to move that LNG from the source to my consumption. The markets that are today is LNG now is a lot more fungible, and that shipment can get diverted. And we are talking to customers today about how do they optimize that diversion of that cargo from one location to another, and potentially offset that with power contracts or other types of financial mechanisms. So LNG is now this fuel that connects us globally, and that's going to have an impact on prices to your consumers, and how we optimize that across the various markets. The other area that we're exploring to get into is using Plexos to actually be a fundamental tool in price forecasting of gas. Today, many markets, you have a handshake, and especially when power, as we shift more to natural gas-driven power generation, you have this tight coupling of gas markets. So the way we used to do it is we'd take a gas forecast, run it through an optimization, and look at how we're going to dispatch power. However, the power dispatch impacts the price of gas. So instead of having this coupling that we would do a couple iterations on, we're looking to do that co-optimization so it gets solved all in one process, which would give us a better indication of future gas prices, a better indication of how our units are going to run from a planning and investment perspective. So you need an integrated model. So where we are today is really looking at that tight integration across power, water, heat, if you will, as well, and gas. And then looking at different types of optimization models, applying stochastics to it. Stochastics or probabilities are really important to see the boundaries of your decision process, which requires a lot more computing power, which requires the ability to potentially use it in a grid distribution method or in the cloud. And that's why we've been investing in Plexus Connect to allow you to do those larger stochastic iterations. So what now is, we're exploring and we're continuing to work on is how do we make the tool better for allowing you to do co-optimization? How do we look at the interface? How do we employ training so that co-optimization is part of your everyday vocabulary as opposed to a special case? So we're looking at how the grids are interacting together, whether you're doing it zonally or whether you're trying to do it nodally. How do we build that infrastructure so that the product can allow you to take that information and get ready for your simulations? And you have to sort of ask yourself, what are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to solve in your simulation? Because what you're trying to achieve is going to impact the trade-offs in doing that type of analysis. This is an example of some of the things that you're trying to look at that you can solve with better co-optimization. Looking at how greenhouse gases are being modeled, looking at how are you trying to optimize storage? Are you looking to meet various renewable portfolio standards with combination of power and gas assets? And then also allowing you to run the simulations in a short-term environment so that you can maximize the profitability of your portfolio decisions. With that, I'll sort of pause here and just open it up to any questions that you might have. And now I'll sort of talk about some case studies that our customers have presented at previous user group meetings or some of the interactions that we've been doing with our customers. Any questions? So some of the studies, a recent customer is China Light and Power, and they wanted to look at the short-term optimization. So how do you use Plexus in a short-term environment to support trading, short-term portfolio optimizations, managing complex fuel contracts, managing complexities of imports of nuclear power from China? How do they optimize this in looking at a rolling tomorrow, next week, and sort of the balance of the month? So they're a recent delivery that have succeeded, and they have saved significant funds in doing this. A lot of times when the nice thing about short-term optimization, it's relatively straightforward to justify these types of processes because the return on investment is extremely short. In many cases, it could be in the area of 6 to 12 months that you can return the investment because of the pure fuel savings or improvements of the profitability of your portfolio. We also use it in the area. Plexus was expanded to do desalination. So if you want to do co-optimization in the Middle East, where so much of the power is co-optimized between generating clean drinking water through desalination and energy, you can't talk about power without talking about water. And there the investment was made to do co-optimization of the desalination units in addition to the electric infrastructure, driving better decisions for how are they going to build out into the future. The other thing that's changing the Middle East, instead of 7 nations that have been individually operating their own assets, they're now looking to form a broader regional market. So trading is now important. Understanding, do I run my portfolio or do I buy from a regional utility? So again, market restructuring, driving co-optimization, as well as making better investment decisions. Another case is in Dubai. Dubai Electric and Water, they are large producers of power and electricity. So there again, looking at both from an integrated resource planning perspective to a fuel budgeting process, how do they optimize their energy decisions through co-optimization of both power and water. You may have heard of this brand, Tesla, although I heard this morning in the news that their recent model didn't get a nod by Consumers Report, which their stock price went down 10% yesterday, or 3%, 3.5% yesterday. Tesla is a user of Plexos. They worked with the ISOs here with AMO, looking at putting the largest battery into a 100 megawatt battery into the Australian market. And part of the energy optimization of that was if you just looked at energy alone, the project was not profitable. But when you looked at the battery as providing ancillary services, that added the incremental value to make that investment necessary. You waving? Hi. And then you heard some of the use cases here, but you'll have this slide as well. But here's some excellent examples of using co-optimization in Australia and solving both integrated resource planning and operational decisions, looking at that co-optimization. And in fact, we have hired Rob Homer, who's our product manager, and for gas. So we have a dedicated focus now just on gas optimization. And I'm going to have Rob interacting with our Australian customers to sort of understand what do they like about it, what additional enhancements are necessary to make it a more effective tool, because Australia is clearly the front runner in power and gas co-optimization. You heard Stephen the other day give that brilliant presentation of SEAMS. Well, co-optimization not only across renewables, but also across regions. How do you use Plexos to go across a very large geographic area and looking at doing some innovative things to drive more renewables into the North American market using Plexos and that excellent presentation that Stephen did yesterday. So in summary, the world is changing, as you know, and it's getting more complicated, and you need more robust applications in order to solve some of these problems. And we're looking to continue to invest in the robustness of the model. We're also looking to invest in helping you spend more time on the results than on the front end. So investments in data, investments in how you manage data, investments in how we push out the results of the results so that you can share it with your stakeholders more effectively, so that you can be more influential to your stakeholders. And I would just say today, as I go around the world, I'm going to start saying, be very cautious of if you're just modeling power alone, be cautious of those results because of this integration, because of this tight coupling of the various markets. The other side of this is we also need to step up our game as it relates to training and support, because as the problems get harder, we don't want you to struggle through this. We're extending our support hours. We need to extend our training materials. We hired Dallas, who's in here somewhere in the back. His dedicated focus is training. We have someone 100% focused on really bringing on a learning platform and helping our customers solve these complicated problems. And the other side, which is sort of a passion of mine, I've done a lot of work with Microsoft and Amazon, is how do we help bring cloud compute technology, make it more affordable? How do we make it more seamless? How do we do it safely so you feel that your data is secure, you're not worried about cyber issues? So we have to work with our partners of Amazon and Microsoft and perhaps others on bringing that infrastructure so that you can do your job more effectively and you can manage your cost as well. With that, I think I've covered my 30 minutes, and I really look forward. I've had a great time meeting you all, and I look forward to working with you going forward.